begin with a quote. The only genius in entrepreneurship is not giving up. Something you said. And so I want to start there. And I think what would be most interesting is to hear about a time in your life that you probably should have given up and you didn't, and it worked to your benefit.
Sure. So, I think I'll give you the one that probably stands in my mind the most. So I became the CEO of PAR in, I think, December 3rd or 4th of 2018. And when I came into the company, I had literally one responsibility, which was to sell the company because we were kind of giving up. The board had given up, the management had given up, and we didn't really see an outcome. And it's supposed to be a really easy gig. I'm just meeting bankers and telling the story and hoping somebody buys it, and then see you later. Everyone's off to their next thing. And on that first day in the office, I still remember very vividly, our CFO, Brian, walks in and says, "Hey, got to tell you something. We were doing this reconciliation, and we think we've got less than $5 million left in the bank." And I was like, "We're burning $2 million a month. Like, how are we gonna sell the company? Because when you sell a business like ours, it's been around for a long time and it's public. It takes a lot of time." And he was like, "Yeah, what are we gonna do?" And I think the normal response would have been like, "Dude, I know nothing about restaurants, nothing about restaurant technology. I was supposed to be here for a few months and be out of here." But the natural entrepreneurial instincts kind of said, "Let's go find a path." And so we called everybody back to the office that night. We created a plan, a restructuring plan, a sort of get well plan. And we did some really tough stuff. We laid off tons of people. We sold off a division, but we created a new mission, a new vision, a culture that we could all get inspired and built this company. And looking back, and I get asked by my friends this all the time because I took a massive, pay cut, relocation cut, moving from New York City to a small town upstate New York. Why the hell did I do that? And today it's like, oh, it makes sense. The whole thing worked. But back then, if I look at the facts objectively, I don't know what I was thinking. Like it should have been an easy give up, but there's a fight or flight mechanism, and I tend to always be in the fight one.
And so let's talk about those difficult decisions. I have a business coach. I think most coaches and consultants, they do, just like every therapist has a therapist. And something that my coach tells me repeatedly is that my success professionally is limited only by my ability to have difficult conversations. Most times, I think on this entrepreneurial journey in a leadership position, the path is clear. It's obvious. And what we need to do is relatively simple, right? It was a simple decision to sell off a division and to lay off a ton of people, but it's not easy. And so talk to me about building that muscle of, making the hard decisions, having the tough conversation.
I think it comes from two grounding facts. The first is that business is about dealing with problems. When people ask me what I do all day, I think the simplest response oftentimes is I just deal with problems all day. It's very rare that I have a meeting that's like a lot of fun and it's like, oh, let's just celebrate ourselves. 9 out of 10 meetings are hard stuff, and it's generally problems. And so I think it's if you want to be a business person, you got to go in knowing you are going to battle every day to figure out a bunch of problems. But the second sort of foundational point is I think all problems are people problems. And if you can kind of rectify those two things in your head, I think you get to the point quickly where your job is to solve people problems. And to solve people problems, you have to have honest, transparent conversations, get comfortable with that motion. And everyone has a different path to get there. But anyone that I think is successful in running a company or starting a company, figures it out. How they figure it out can be different. There are some people that are just wired to be direct and honest and confrontational in many ways, and that can work. There are other people that learn it over time. For me, I would say I kind of realized a couple things. When I look back over my career, when I've made mistakes, it's always been not having that tough, awkward conversation with an employee that probably wasn't the right fit or the right cultural fit, and just stalling because I liked them or they were a lot older than me, so it was kind of awkward, or I felt bad for them because they had a family. And when I fast forwarded 6 months, it was like, gosh, not only did I do myself a disservice, I did the company a disservice, and I made everybody around me realize that I wasn't having that tough conversation, and I was allowing a cultural challenge to survive. And so I realized, at some point that if I don't have that tough conversation, I'm not actually being nice to that human being. I'm actually hurting them in their own career because inevitably they're going to be gone anyways. But I'm also really hurting myself because the team around me can see somebody that's not a fit and I've kept them and I'm not living our values. And so when I go and stand up and say our values matter, our culture matters, and they can point to me like, what do you mean? You waited, 2 years to fire somebody we should have fired a year ago. And so to me, I got there because I realized I'm doing that person a disservice and myself a disservice and the company a disservice. But I think other people are naturally wired that way. For me, it took some time.
You were young when you took the big chair at Par Technologies, which is wild to me. What was the path that led you there, and what do you think made you most qualified to take that position at what I think was 16 years old?
I wasn't qualified, so I'll start there. So it's a long story, and PAR's been around for a very long time. We've been around for 60 years. We started out as an IT services company to the Department of Defense. In 1978, our founders invented the point-of-sale terminal. In 1982, we went public. We had a great run in the 80s where restaurants were switching from cash registers to point-of-sale devices. And then for 25 years, we kind of worked our way slowly towards bankruptcy. And that was primarily because we were a hardware and services business. We sold great hardware, but incredible service. But as you can imagine, manufacturing and assembling hardware in the United States is a tough business, the past 30 years. And so it was just a tough business model. I discovered PAR because in 2017, I and a friend kind of discovered that while PAR was, a $200 million hardware and services company, there was like a few $1 million software business there that we thought was kind of special, which was called Brink, which was point of sale software targeted for the enterprise. Think of it as Toaster Square, but for large enterprise restaurants. So not for restaurants like you had, but large chains. And the idea was that like there's something interesting there. And so I remember meeting the prior CEO and saying, hey, would you sell me that business? Like, can I go run that thing? You're a hardware and services company. Let me go do it. And we kind of got rebuffed, but I sort of made a case. And then fast forward, I don't know exactly when this was, maybe it's a year later or something. Somebody reached out to me and said, hey, would you like to, interview for the board of PAR? And my actual initial reaction was like, no. I don't know anything about hardware and services. I was a young hotshot in New York, getting all these cool opportunities. Like the last thing I wanted to do was join a business that I didn't really know, wasn't passionate about hardware. And, there's a lot of peculiarities around PAR. We were public, but, family influence. We were great, high quality culture, but employees were leaving in droves. We were, under investigation for bribery and corruption, and every Google article was negative, but we had this great opportunity. But I eventually met the founder of PAR and really, found him to be high integrity, incredibly passionate, but also somebody that was really willing to see that the world had changed and wanted to embrace that change. And so I said, sure, I'll join the board. And so I get on the board, and within 8 weeks, it was really clear this was not going to work. Our prior CFO literally went to jail for stealing money. We had this investigation, and as a board member, I was getting emails from customers saying how pissed off they were, and I'm like, this is weird. Like board members don't get emails from customers. And so I asked the CEO if I could go fly up and meet the management team and just see what's going on. And I met the management team, and then I flew to our other offices, met the management team, and I came back to the board, and I said, guys, we got to sell the company. This is not a winnable thing. I said, I got three really basic observations. Our little software product has incredible potential. So observation one is we got product market fit. Let's do it. But observation two is we are structurally set up for failure. We don't get enough money. Our employee NPS, like a measure of satisfaction, or was like negative 50 or 60. So you can't even get lower than that. So employees really don't like working here. Our customer CSAT was equally poor. So customers don't like it. Employees don't like it. We got no money. We got really kind people, but no one is aligned to a mission or a vision. I asked the top 10 or 12 execs, what's the best job you've ever had? Nobody said their current job. And I was on the compensation committee, right? So I thought somebody would lie to me and be like, oh, I love my job or something. And when you'd ask, what's the plan? What's the vision? No, it wasn't aligned. You could tell it was all over the place. And then my third observation of the board was there's too much distraction. Like you Google our company, it is about people going to jail. It's about SEC and DOJ violations. It's about activist shareholders calling us the worst performing stock in the last 50 years. It's really hard to build a big outcome if you're so distracted with all this negativity. And then the board kind of came back and said, we don't want to sell. Let's go find a new CEO. We spent 4 or 5 months trying to find a CEO, and nobody wanted to take the job really. And so when I became the CEO, to your point, I was wholly unqualified because the job was just come in there and sell it, and then we'll all like wash our hands of this. And so I don't know if I was particularly qualified, but I had the energy, the excitement, and I had a plan. And then when you kind of get thrown in the fire, you figure out if you can survive or not. So I don't think my story is a case study by any means to doing it, but we kind of figured it out.
Yeah, I think there's so many parallels though between like where Par was when you took over and so many independent owners and operators. Right? Like they've been in these businesses for 10 years. The businesses, especially in recent years, are slowly but surely diminishing. And they bought themselves a job, ostensibly, right? They don't particularly enjoy what they do for a living. Their teams aren't compensated well because they can't afford to compensate their teams well. There's customer dissatisfaction because the quality of service or the quality of food has to be dramatically reduced to an increase in labor, an increase in COGS. It seems like an untenable situation. And here you were in an untenable situation, and you made it out. And now you guys are thriving. And I want to talk about that and all of the innovation. But before, I want to know how you got there. Can you triage in your mind? You looked at this business, and what were the steps you took? Was it to initially save money, to innovate, to spend money differently? Walk me through it.
So yeah, I'll tell you play by play what we did, but it reminded me to come back to this, which is we did it because we changed the culture. In the end, there wasn't a master plan that worked. We defined a really unique culture, lived by it, and it led to all these outcomes. That now looking back looks like a grand plan, but it was really, I think, that cultural sort of getting the right people around the table. But so I think the first observation we had back then, and we kind of still hold this today, is that the restaurant is being eaten alive by software. And whether you realize it or not, every part of your workflow as a restaurant operator is either being touched by software, being disintermediated by software, replaced by software. And this is getting back in 2018, 19, that was, not really appreciated. And I think the part that we thought was unique was that we're like, holy crap, this is not going to be solved the way the restaurant industry is solving it today, which is, oh my God, I need a mobile app. Let me go get a vendor to make me a mobile app. Oh my God, I need an online ordering system. Let me find a vendor to do that. I need a loyalty system. Let me find a vendor to do that. I need a catering system. Let me find a vendor to do that. I need DoorDash, Uber Eats. And you ended up, this idea of let me plug in a bunch of stuff. We felt back then like, holy cow, this is going to fail massively, because then you as a restaurant operator are just a vendor manager of a bunch of different random products trying to create a specialized customer outcome. Like that's just never going to work. And so back then we said, hey, like let's if we can make this happen, that will be the vision. And so we all aligned on the mission and the vision, which is our mission was how do we create frictionless technology experiences. Our vision was, our mission, was how do we create personalized experiences for brands and meals to get closer for guests to be closer to their brands and meals and moments they love. How do we create our vision was very clear, which is this is all going to get unified. How the hell do we do this? And so we started and spent the first 2 years really fortifying that point of sale product. And the reason why we did that was we said that's going to be the fulcrum. That's where everything's going to be plugged into. That's where the innovation needs to actually happen. It's not going to be in the cool whiz-bang mobile app. It's going to be on that core infrastructure technology so that you can integrate stuff into beautifully. So we spent a year and a half, 2 years doing that. Now, during that time, like I said, my second week on the job, we had to lay off 25% of the workforce, which 25% is an enormous amount of people. It was super painful, super rough. But I learned, back then, to your point of having tough conversations. My second week of the job, I got on stage, and that's back when people worked in an office, and told the whole company, here's what we did. But I started by saying, those 100, 200 people we just laid off, we have disrupted their lives forever. If you have ever been fired, you become insecure the rest of your life, because there's a moment where you start to worry, how am I going to pay for food for kids? How do I send my kids to school? And we have done a disservice to those human beings. But that isn't a we thing. That is those people in the front row, those executives who are paid a lot, and my fault, because we didn't create a company that could sustain them, and we never should have hired them. And so none of the blame of this goes to them. It goes to those executives in the front and me. And I think having that transparent conversation actually set the tone for everything we did after, because if you're an executive, you're like, oh shit, like did that guy just say that it's my fault that we just fired all these people? And at the same time, I think the employees of the company realized, hey, like this is going to be a transparent environment. And we went and walked through that. So for step one was, that's the mission vision. Step two was how the hell do we action this, which is we had to free up a bunch of cash. We then sold off a division, worked on a refinancing, put a bunch of money on the balance sheet. And then we spent, like I said, a year and a half, 2 years really rebuilding and fortifying our point of sale product so that we felt like we could grow from that. And then we came up with this vision, which is we wanted to buy or build a back office business, a payments business, and then what we called an engagement suite of products, which were online ordering, loyalty, the stuff that touches the customer. And the idea was that if we could have the back office POS here in one end, and then the engagement solutions here, those products connect together to create a unified tech experience. And so it's sort of, if you look back, you're like, oh, they started with POS, then they went to back office, then they went to payments, and they went to loyalty and online ordering. It looks really natural. It definitely wasn't like that, but that was the vision, which was, hey, we want to have a sort of front to back end solution to run your enterprise restaurant. But anyways, like I said, step one was fortifying, making sure we survive. Step two was fortifying the point of sale system. Step three was acquiring these products, deeply integrating them into it so that we could give you, in the end, give you a platform to run your restaurant off.
I think you said foundationally, the biggest shift was culture.
Yeah.
My wife survived what was a 50% layoff for the company she was working with back in 2018. Um, and I mean, it forever changed the culture. It wasn't
Yeah.
just about the people that got laid off. It was about the other half that survived, having experienced that firsthand, watching droves of people in lines walking into an office to get, it was this
Yeah.
whole thing. And so it's fascinating to me that you say that, what turned around the company was a shift in culture, which obviously had an incredibly rocky start. I can't imagine anyone that was working for the company prior to the layoffs didn't see it coming to some degree, that they didn't see that this was a business in decline. So they probably lived with a baseline level of anxiety into this nightmare situation, into what you're describing is a positive culture filled with like support and innovation and all of these things. So like, how did you rebuild brick by brick?
So the first step it was actually defining the culture we wanted. And so when somebody asked me on that first town hall I did, what do you think of our values? And I said, I think they're really fancy posters on the wall. And everyone's like, what the hell? Why did you say that? And I said, well, like, look at your first value. It's like caring for your employees. And I'm like, we're a company back then of 1,000 people, and I'm like, 20 people have equity in the company. Do we really care for you, or is it just a fancy word? Because we're not giving you the money to take care of your family. You're not benefiting the success of our company. Our second one was like authenticity. And I'm like, are we really authentic? Like, how can a company with so much potential be in the ground? Like, we're clearly not having the awkward, hard conversations to build a great company. And so I said, I'm not actually saying they're bad values, but we're not living them. And so I said, I'll know the values of the company when we see what we live by. And so we went out, and back then we only had 3 values. And remember, this is an acute problem. We were scared of going bankrupt. We needed to make change. And so those 3 values were literally speed, and our taglines, we don't wait for the elevators; ownership, which is we wanted owners, not renters of PAR; and winning. And we made them very tough. And so when you look at those values, right, think if you were an employee of PAR at that time, you've been here for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. You're like, whoa, like this is about winning. It's about building a culture that's going to, we want to be the Patriots, which is hard for me to say as a Jet fan, but we want a culture of winning, right? And so I think what our values did at the time, honestly, was more about rebuking those that weren't going to be a fit, those that were trying to win through bureaucracy, those that were just hanging around to drink cold brew coffee and write on whiteboards and brainstorm on beanbags. Like, we wanted to get those people out of here. And so that was the first thing, which is here are the values. Then we tied it to our mission and our vision. And then we live by it. So I'll give you some examples. So, because PAR has been around for a while, there was all sorts of stuff like that didn't make sense. So, I, as the CEO, was on the road, 30, 40% of the year. And I would make it a point to say, hey, I'm going to fly the back of the plane. I am going to be I'm the guy around the office shutting the lights off. And then I said, hey, I'm not going to find the wastage in this company. Everybody else is. And so we started creating programs to encourage it. As an example, if you found $100 of savings, Josh, we'd give you $10. We would say, let's create this culture of ownership. You should get paid for that, right? If you're delivering for our shareholders, you got to get paid. Then we started thinking about, hey, how do we create this culture of ownership? Everyone's so scared to say the right thing. And so, as an example, when somebody would send me an email, it would be so formal. It'd be like, Savneet, comma, da-da-da. It was like 3 paragraphs to say, 1 sentence. And so then I would reply back in all caps, like, with a bunch of typos purposely to encourage collaboration and speaking. I would send emails in the subject line forgetting that the message each should create this collaboration. We would pay employees if they found a recurring meeting that we didn't need. We all agreed we could shut off that recurring meeting. That employee would get $1,000. If you found a report that we didn't need, you would get $1,000. We created, we put our money where our mouth is to reinforce that culture. And in a very short period of time, you got to see who acted like an owner and who didn't. And a lot of it was sincerity. I was on the floor with the employees. I was on, our leadership team was living it. And so that culture has to be manifested by leadership, and it has to be natural. Like, you can't be the CEO says, I care about ownership, and then you're flying private planes and telling your team to be cost. It doesn't work. If you say your culture value is speed, as an example, and people reach out to you and you take 2 days to respond, like, that's where they learn from. And so we obsessed over these cultural elements. And then we took massive risks. We would put 27-year-olds in charge of $20 million business lines. I remember at one point our head of marketing was 30 years old. Our CFO was 40 years old. Then we had business unit leaders that were 63 years old. We were really comfortable taking risks if people who live by our values. And so the point I'm making here is, you create these values, you got to live by them, and then you got to promote and compensate and then fire along those values. And so we really institutionalized a lot of these practices so that they would just become reinforcing over time. And it grew and it grew. And then, I tell you today, the values have grown. Now we've got 5 values, but the culture is self-reinforcing. And again, so much of that culture is telling you on the way in, hey man, this is not an easy place to work. It's going to be a ton of work, but we win, we love winning, and we get to take care of our teammates and our customers that way. And that's kind of what I find inspirational. And so I promise you, if you're interviewing Josh, I'll be like, we're going to dominate. We came from bankrupt to being $1 billion company in 3 years, and watch where we're going to be in 5 years from now. But we got there by really hard work, really transparent conversations, a commitment to deliver outcomes to our customers. I said, I don't care if you work 24 hours a day. I care if you're 10 minutes a day actually solve the customer's problem. And if you want to be a part of that winning team, we'd love to have you, and we're going to take care of you as best we can. But I want to tell you now, it's not easy. And so, I can't tell you how many people get to me in the last round. They're like, you know what, like, I kind of wanted to chill your job. And I'm like, awesome. Like, go for it.
I've got this guy, a restaurant owner in Huntington Beach, California. He had a really successful business on the East Coast, comes out to Southern California, thinks he's going to have the same result, thinks he's going to dominate. And he struggled since the day he opened for years now. And he follows me. Like, he emails me questions, and he's in my free 5-day challenge, and he shows up for every webinar. And I hit him up and I was like, why aren't you a client? Like, why wouldn't you sign up for any one of these things that we do? And he goes, honestly, the thing that holds me back is that I'm pissed, that I'm angry. I'm angry that, like, there was a time when all I needed to do was make great pizza, and that was enough to have a business that would sustain me and my family and all of that. And today that's just not the case. And I can't get over it. And you guys spent 2 years building out a solution into a global pandemic. And as you're building out these solutions, as you're shifting the trajectory of PAR Technologies, the industry itself is shifting massively at the same time. How were you able to not only catch up, but like adapt and get ahead when, like, it felt like the whole world was changing for everyone?
Well, let me first say that journey of that restaurant owner or operator that you mentioned, I empathize with that immensely, because it is an incredibly unfair juxtaposition to have that restaurant operator say, make that amazing pizza that my family would come in, eat at your restaurant, enjoy, give you a tip, walk out. Keep doing that. But at the same time, I want you to build Amazon.com out the back of the kitchen so you can do Uber Eats, DoorDash, and online ordering. And by the way, I want you to be a great web marketing company and beyond, Yelp and Google and TikTok and all these other things. And I still expect you to run the same exact restaurant you did 20 years ago, and I came here when I was a kid. It is such a messed up idea that they can be Amazon.com, a great restaurant for the same 4 walls they started with years ago. And what gets me excited is that, which is the only way the restaurant operator can survive is through technology. How the hell can you be all these things to all these people? And so I think that that's actually what gets me out of bed, which is like, how do we solve that person's challenge? Because that is a crappy and unfair juxtaposition to put them in, and it's just crazy. So that's really where it is. To your question of like how we adapted at PAR, I think that we welcome change. We are constantly, I think if anyone would tell you, like, the greatest critique of people who don't work at PAR is we're willing to make change. We're willing to rip up a piece of paper and say, holy cow, that was completely the wrong idea. Or that was a completely the wrong person, or that was completely the wrong org structure. And we have a saying at PAR, our 5th value and our newest value is called never settle. But it's basically a ripoff of Amazon's day one mentality. At the beginning of this year, I wrote an email on January 1st to all the employees at PAR, which I call day one mentality. And the idea, was that I was like, gosh, I'm out here like applauding myself a lot. It's like when we were a tiny company now, I'm like, oh man, look at all the stuff we've done. I'm on Josh's podcast saying how great we are. And I realized that, like the problem with that is it's good to celebrate your successes and build on that culture, but you then get lazy. And I was sitting there thinking like, like normally I would go fight this stupid policy we have that makes no sense, but I'm just going to be like, I don't want to go fight with legal or HR or finance. Like, let's go to the next thing. And reality is picking up those battles. It's picking up those pennies if you're the restaurant that actually make you profitable or great or give you the ability to reinvest in your team and your talent. It's actually willing to pick up those tiny annoying things that you're like, oh God, I got to have a meeting with compliance, then HR, then finance to make this change. And I was giving up on those and just saying, let me work on the next more important thing. And I said, holy crap, like we're losing that day one mentality. And so I think we've really ingrained in our culture that like every day is day one. and we don't have the right to be here. We were on the verge of bankruptcy. And so we kind of have that PTSD of like, that could be us any day. And so for us, that those changes that you mentioned, like that is just a reality. And so we're very inspired by one, that operator's challenge, but two, it is every day is day one. And it's like, how do we reinvent ourselves? Because what we did to get here is clearly not going to keep us going.
I was keynoting at the NRA in May, and I walked booth by booth by booth. I walked the whole show. And the phrase that you hear again and again and again and again is data. We're going to give you more data. We're going to give you better data. We're going to give you bigger data. And data to a restaurant owner, in my mind, is worth very little. The value is in the interpretation of that data. The value is in actionable data. And I know that you guys have a central focus on the same thing. Talk to me about the way that PAR is leveraging data to help restaurateurs make better decisions.
Yeah, it's a great question. So in 2021, we acquired a loyalty business called Punch. Punch has now grown into the largest loyalty business in the restaurant world. Everybody from, Taco Bell and Wendy's to much smaller concepts. And when I think about data, I think there's sort of and I'm going to break it into sort of two categories. There's the marketing side of the house, which has always been heavy on data. There isn't a restaurant company in the world that has multiple units that hasn't sort of spent a lot of time thinking about how do I target Josh, how do I target so on and so forth. And the reason I bring up that marketing business is over there's always been a ton of data, right? It's just breaking the signal from the noise. It's sort of saying, you know what, like this campaign is going to be higher ROI than this campaign because of all the prior data that we have. And in that part of the world, I think where data is changing is it's not turning into, oh my God, if I have this title or subject line or text message, I'm going to have the open rate's going to double. It's actually now turning into, how do I make the highest ROI marketing campaign to Josh and his family versus this segment of customers? And when we think about data, that's what we think about, which is how do I create a personalized experience? How do I elevate the hospitality feeling that you get? And so I always dream one day of going into a restaurant, and because of technology, I walk in, the menu is in the format that I want, whether I want it on my phone, whether I want it in VR glasses, whether I want a paper menu, it already knows that. It knows that my wife is a vegan and my kid has a nut allergy. It has my credit card, my loyalty. And so when we sit down, we have this great hospital experience, everything is known, and we walk out without ever having to take out my wallet, take out my phone, and we have a truly amazing experience. That will be enabled by a very personalized set of experiences that things like loyalty programs can do. But the big switch that's happening today is not how do I run a marketing campaign, how do I maximize the ROI of each and every individual customer? And that's where things like AI are going to be wildly, wildly helpful. And so the way we approach data on that side of our world is thinking about personalized experiences to enhance the experience you have with that brand or that meal that you love, and doing it at a very individualized level, not a categorical, 40-year-old male with family of two. The second part of data, and this is where I think you're talking about that I think is really important, is the operator side. How do I run a more efficient and better run restaurant through the data I get from my point of sale system, the back office company, my HR system, and potentially my financial platform? And the really, really, really hard part about that is all of those are different disparate vendors. The POS guy's got some data, the HR firm's got data, the back office company's got data, the inventory data. I mean, there's so much data, right? And you're kind of overwhelmed. And so our vision at PAR is that how do I take the data across all of those 3, 4, 5, 6 systems and simplify it into like, okay, do this. Or these are the 5 most things we'd recommend, such that you have something actionable to work with. Because in the end, you getting a note on your phone that whatever, tomatoes are out or tomatoes are on sale and go run tomato, it doesn't do anything for you because it's the logistics nightmare behind that. However, if you had a button that said, okay, update all your labor shifts based on these weather changing patterns with this sort of inventory in the back, plus this, press a button, that's a game changing experience. And so when we think about data, I don't think it's at all about getting the data. A lot of people spend time like, oh, I'm trying to match the data from the point of sale system to the back office system. And I'm like, yeah, that's not a good use of your time. Take one set of data, get a few actionable insights, operate on those, and change. Because as you know, running a restaurant is getting a few things really right, not getting 10,000 things right. And if you think about the greatest performing chains in the world, and I know not all your listeners are chain restaurants, but think of the best chains in the world, they're the ones that are the simplest ones. It's In-N-Out, it's Raising Cane's, it's Chick-fil-A, and those are wildly complex businesses, but they get the 3 or 4 or 5 things that really, really matter, right? And I think data is the same way, which is there's endless data points. It's figuring out the top 5% that are actually going to change your business. And so our way of doing that at PAR is consolidating that data in one place and giving you actionable insights that you can operate on, versus let me tell you the 10,000 things you could do or you could look at. Because in the end, it's like, I don't even know what to look at. If somebody came to PAR and said, here's all the data at PAR, I'd be like, okay, like what do I do? And I think that's the same challenge at restaurants. So our view is like creating data to actionable actions, not just insights.
At its core, PAR Technologies is a solutions company. Now, you create solutions through technology, but it's a solutions company, which leads me to believe you probably spend a lot of time thinking about the problems in the industry. Everybody's aware of the problems they have today, but your job, because it takes you years to build software, is to figure out what tomorrow's problems are. What are the problems of tomorrow that you guys are working to solve today?
So the first one actually is the data one. We're obsessively building out a data platform because our great concern is that every restaurant now will have some form of modern software. If you're a restaurant, you've got tech in there. And so how do you get an edge as a restaurant, right? How do you then figure out how are you any different than your competitors? It's a little bit like AI today. I sort of joke, everyone's gonna have the same AI tools. So do we actually create any efficiency for anybody? Is every business just doing the same thing? Is it an arms race to buy a bunch of software? And I think for us, the challenge that I feel for the restaurant industry is that how do we unify your data so that you can actually do something with it that's specialized for your brand versus your competitor's brand, even though you may have the same platform. So I think organizing and unifying that data to give you true actionable actions is like a huge future proofing of your business. The second thing that we're doing, and this is what we've been doing for 6 years now, is this idea of deeply integrating the products within the restaurant stack so that you have a more unified experience. When I think about this unified experience, and again, this term unified commerce is sort of spread like wildfire through our industry, but I always think about if I'm the CIO or CMO or chief digital officer of a restaurant, or heck, I'm just the guy running a store, one individual store. How do I create an experience that is on my digital experiences that are the same as my physical experiences? How do I create my real estate footprint to match my digital footprint? And that's really hard when you've got 6 vendors that are connected to deliver that experience. And so if you've got a different vendor, that's your online ordering vendor, that's from your mobile app vendor, from your loyalty and vendor, from your POS company and your payments company, how do you get those 5 or 6 companies to create this like beautiful experience digitally that matches the in-store experience? And what we're doing at PAR is very focused on unifying those products so that you're not working with 6 vendors, you're working with maybe 1 or 2, so that you can then control that experience and focus on what matters to you. And if we're successful in doing this, I think what will happen is that our customers will move from being a really good manager of vendors to refocusing their time on their guest and being like, what does the guest want? Let me work backwards of what I can do versus what my vendors can provide for me.
You talk about opportunities and all of these things that you're focused on, but you're the belle of the ball now. You went from near bankruptcy to now it's worth like $1 billion. So I'm sure the phone rings a lot. I'm sure there are a ton of unsolicited opportunities that are presented to you. How do you determine what's an opportunity and what's a distraction?
It's an awesome question, and I don't know if anyone has a perfect answer. The simplistic, investment like answer would be pick the one with the highest ROI. But if that was easy, people, mathematicians would have been the best CEOs. I think that the real skill here is creating some form of framework or rubric to make those decisions. And so the way that I think about it is for most of our investments at PAR, we focus on the ones that have the most impact to the most amount of customers. So when I have a customer meeting and that customer gives us an idea and they're like, holy crap, like that's actually relevant for like a lot of different people have that challenge. It quickly works its way up the list, near the top of the list. But if I meet a customer and they have this, idea that we need to, that they're like sort of like pounding the head, we got to do this. And I'm like, oh man, like this is really only relevant to like your organization. It goes way down the list because as much as I want to make that customer happy and hit their goals, it's so not relevant to the community that we serve. And so it moves down. And that's like a very simple rubric, but to think about it. The second part of your spend, which I think should be like your experimental spend, are when you want to take some bets and you want to take some, take a gutsy swing and say, I'm not sure anyone really wants this, but I got a feeling they do. And let's spend and kind of get ahead of the curve and take those bets. And that's where you got to expect that, 75% of those bets turn to 0, but you get 1 right. And it's really exciting because then you've kind of done something ahead of the curve. Your customers see that, but your employees see that, and then you encourage them to go after that. And so the coolest part about the AI journey of all technology companies today is your workforce is so inspired to find that next cool thing now. And it's so accessible and so easy. So that's how I look at it, PAR, which is what has the most impact on those customers, and then what's that experimental spend that's just about trying to get, trying to do something that, skating to where the puck is.
Hey, talk to me about risk tolerance, your perspective on risk, because in the early days, you couldn't afford to take any risks and you were taking massive swings, some of which worked, some of which didn't. And now things are going so well. So now you can't afford to take risks either because things are going so well. You've been on both sides of the spectrum. And I think that for so many people listening, they're afraid to innovate. They're afraid to take risks in their business. Maybe because they don't have the bandwidth, maybe because they don't have the money, maybe because they've chosen poorly in the past, right? And it hasn't worked out. How do you look at risk?
I think risk and business are like almost one and the same. I think every decision you make has risk. Every direction you choose will have some form of risk. And I think the direction of your organization is completely reflective of leadership's desire to take those risks. So at PAR, I think risk taking is a very normal part of our culture. But when I think about risk taking, to me, it's always a people decision versus a super strategic business decision. If we are having a product problem, as an example, and we've had many of those over time, I rarely do I go and say, okay, let me go into the Scrum meeting and figure out like who's not delivering and what the problem is and why our product is behind our competitors or where we want it to be. I tend to think about like we got a people problem, and is that problem the person? Is that person in the wrong role? Is that person in the wrong group? Or do we need to find a new person? And so for me, I think where we have created our culture of risk at PAR is I think an organization that's comfortable taking the risk on human beings who raise their hand and want to go do something. And if they fail, which will inevitably happen, we create an environment for them to still be around and not be, still be around tomorrow. And if you do that, the great part is that it encourages others to take risks. So for example, if you've got a product idea and you have a skunkworks thing we want to fund and it fails, if you still have your job, which you would do at PAR, it's actually great because then someone else is going to say, hey, like I could go take that risk, and if it doesn't work, I'm still here. And so, I think about risk taking at the very, the human level of like, are we encouraging our team members to take that risk and pushing it forward? So to me, risk taking is, it's cultural, right? And obviously at PAR, we are really comfortable taking risks on human beings because we think when we've done that is when we've got the best outcomes. The success of PAR is not, like I said, a great strategy. It's this culture that allowed great people to thrive and, the rest of us to get the heck out of the way. So that's how I always look at risk, is it's very much on the human level. And I think that the great companies over time are generally not the ones that have the best audit committee or the best risk committee or the best whatever. It's the ones that are willing to take the most risk. And so, I think, prudent risk, obviously, but those that are willing to sort of say, hey, like, let's change everything we've ever done because we think the wall is coming, generally the ones that survive, and the ones that sort of like refine their perfect mousetrap, are the ones that miss the internet.
As an independent restaurateur, I had a sample set of a dozen, right? Like the restaurants that were immediately in my vicinity. And that's how I benchmarked my own success, the trends within the industry overall. And then, I started the show and I ended up with a data set in the hundreds. And you look at you and your client base and you've got a data set in the tens of thousands, right? How do you view the industry? What's working well? What isn't? Who's thriving? Who's in decline? What are the trends you're seeing?
There's a lot there, but I would say this. I think what works in the restaurant industry are those that are true to their brand promise. What I mean by that is I continue to see whether you adopt technology or not adopt technology, whether you're on TikTok or not on TikTok, whether you change or not, the companies that I see that continually to do well are the ones that never forget why they exist. And that's where I am constantly inspired by whether it's Chick-fil-A or In-N-Out Burger, or conversely, that local restaurant that had the best, homemade pasta. It's never losing sight of like, that's still the, raison d'être, that's still the reason of existence, is that brand promise you started with. I find that the concepts that fail are the ones that are like, oh, let me just create a ghost kitchen because the economics are really great. Or, you know what, like I was really great at homemade pasta, but then if I add pizzas and salads and this, I'm going to increase my AUVs by 20% and I'm going to make all this money. And then what happens, you start cutting the corners on the pasta. And then people are like, oh man, that pasta used to be a lot better. Like, now I'm going to go here, and you kind of destroy your whole thing. You kind of see this with a lot of the pizza chains, right? And so I think that what works now is actually not too dissimilar from what worked in the past, which is always fortifying what made you great and why you're special, and owning that brand promise forever. And those that I think are, better than great are the ones that can take that thing, what they've done amazingly, and bring it to the digital world. And so, your ability to stay really focused on what makes you great, but also making that accessible to more people, I think are the ones that really thrive. And so, if you can find a way to make your brand and your experience, relatable to more people, it's only better for you and for more people to have exposure to what you do. And so I think connecting that bridge is important. And the ones that do it best are the ones that I think say, my digital bridge is actually the same thing that got me here, which is I'm still going to talk about my homemade pastas. I'm still going to focus on that. I'm not going to focus on trying to be something for a new set of people just to get new customers in. And I it's like, honestly, it's like clockwork. I can find a chain that we work with and just look at how the menu changes and being like, oh man, like they're going to get a boost in revenue, and this thing is going to then struggle because they're losing what made them special. Look at Starbucks, right? Like you probably knew when they started making a bunch of neon colored drinks and and all sorts of stuff, that they were kind of losing what made them that coffee house that we went to. So I actually think that, while I could give you a whiz bang answer, like it's actually still the same stuff that got you successful. We're there is what will make you successful going forward. From a pure tech perspective, I think it's pretty obvious what's worked, which is, whether you like it or not, the restaurant organizations that have invested in technology have dramatically outperformed those that haven't. So look at the best performing restaurant companies in the world, whether it's Taco Bell or Chipotle, McDonald's. Look at these companies that have put this massive investment in technology, Domino's, obviously, and look at their peers. Look at Domino's versus whatever, any pizza brand. Look at McDonald's over the long run versus almost any other chain. Look at, obviously, Chipotle versus anybody else. If Chick-fil-A was public, imagine what their performance would be. It's those organizations that have actually made the commitment to invest in technology have dramatically outperformed those that haven't. And the ones that haven't, and you can see their results. And so I think that's like just a categorical example of, you can't hide under a rock, and if you're brand and you're going to be relevant over time, you got to sort of make that investment. The last thing I would say is that those companies that invest in technology, but invest in technology that makes their operator experience better, tend to do better. So if you treat your employees well, we all know, like, you'll get better outcomes for your customers, but how do you have technology help them do that? And I think that I've sort of seen this real commitment from great restaurant brands that are building technology not just to market to their end customers like you or me, but to actually make their employees' experience better. I actually find them to be very few and far between, but those that do, like, they have real great outcomes out of it, because they're still focusing on, how do I make my employee engaged and happy so that they deliver you an engaged and happy experience.
Carlos Santana has this great quote. He says, "Nothing in the world is more contagious than enthusiasm." And I would argue that anything that I've built of at scale was built on the back of my own enthusiasm. When you look at PAR over the next 6, 12, 18 months, what are you most excited about?
Everything. So I get excited by the people. Like I say this every time. We got an amazing team at PAR. We got a team that's been together for a long time. We rarely have anybody leave or at the top, and it is really fun for me because I have 3 individuals on the leadership team at PAR that every day or once every other day tell me I'm an idiot. And it is so fun because you're like, you know what, like, they're not always right, but when they're right, you're like, crap, I just learned something, or I had to change my way of looking about that. And so I love working just because that's a fun environment. But what inspires me is still the mission of PAR, which is to enable personalized experiences to connect people to the brand, meals, and moments they love. And I just love that concept of, how does technology get the heck out of the way so that we can elevate hospitality and make you, that customer, closer to the brand that you love. And we are just wildly, like, we just get excited by that. That is really exciting because you can just envision these crazy worlds of, technology being everywhere, but you can't see any of it, being ambient. And so it's the mission of PAR that inspires me, and I think the people at PAR. But underneath that is, man, I love the team that we have because I learn every single day, and it's a cool environment because I know I'm not the smartest person in the world in the room, or on the Teams chat or whatever. And that, I think, is fun for everybody at PAR because you get to work with people that push you a little bit, and there are so few environments in the world where that's a consistent thing.
This is an industry podcast, and there are tens of thousands of restaurant owners and operators listening right now. Do you have any advice or words of encouragement you'd like to share?
Never give up. I think that if you're passionate about what you're doing, that passion, enthusiasm comes through to your customer, and they can see it, they can feel it. That extra distance you go. The recipe for success, I think, in life is not different than probably what our parents or what our grandparents told us. It's still about hard work, operating with high integrity, committing to the principles that got you there. And so I would encourage every operator not to give up if you really believe in what you're selling and you're building. Just never give up, because it will be recognized and appreciated. The second thing I would say is always invest in your people. That culture you're building, it will compound and compound and compound. And there's nothing like being a leader and discovering that there's somebody on your team that can do something way better than you. And that's really what makes great teams, is that, how do you foster that environment? And I would say triple down on that, particularly in this environment today where it is so hard to get great labor in restaurants, and it's so hard to keep them. Making that investment actually is going to come back in spades. And I think the last thing I'd say is, have fun. I think that we work really hard, but you can't lose sight of the fact that one of the few downsides of the restaurant business is that it can be a 24/7 job. And I oftentimes find operators patting themselves on the back and giving them prideful that they slept in the floor of the restaurant, they didn't come home, or they're on a plane visiting all their stores, and I always say, like, that's amazing, but like, what's the point of all of this? Is to have a great life, right? It's to spend time with your family and those that you love. And so don't while it's amazing to have that commitment to your business, also make sure that you're getting benefit of it, because this is one of those few industries where you can literally never stop working, and make sure you get the time to take care of your family and yourself.